Around 2014, I was in a relationship with my college girlfriend. We had been together for 3 years, and I thought we had something solid. College had been a whirlwind of experiences, but our relationship had always felt like an anchor in the midst of all the chaos. At least, that's how I thought of it. She was everything I thought I wanted: beautiful, smart, outgoing, and seemingly confident. What I didn't know, though, was that everything I thought I knew about her was built on lies, and our relationship was about to be torn apart in ways I couldn't have imagined. She had always been a little secretive about her family. She would tell me stories about how successful her dad was, how he owned multiple businesses, and how her family was well off. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, people have different family dynamics. But there were always small signs that something wasn't quite right. She would mention how she had a lot of money from her family, but would sometimes hesitate when it came to specifics, like what kind of business her dad was running. She would drop hints that she had money, but never really shared the details, and I assumed she didn't want to flaunt her wealth. As time passed, I started noticing strange things. Her lifestyle seemed more extravagant than what I expected from someone whose family owned businesses, but didn't seem to share the wealth with her. She had expensive clothes, accessories, and went on frequent trips, often with friends, but always claimed they were just for fun. I thought her dad was just spoiling her, but it never sat quite right. I eventually began to question how she could afford everything, and it didn't take long for me to realize that there were things she was hiding. I had been oblivious for a while, but then the truth started to come to light. I caught her in a lie. She had been seeing an older man. This man, someone I didn't know, was in his 50s, married, and had 3 teenage daughters. To say I was blindsided is an understatement. She had been seeing him for a while, hiding the entire relationship behind my back. He was her sugar daddy, and she was playing both sides. This wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown relationship with someone who was controlling her, buying her gifts, flying her out to vacation destinations, taking her to expensive dinners, and paying for her lifestyle. And I had been the fool, blind to it all. What's worse is that he wasn't just giving her money. He was sleeping with her, and he was sleeping with her friends as well. She had been in a relationship with me, and with him at the same time, and I had no idea. I had trusted her, loved her, and she was betraying me right in front of my eyes. She had been living a double life, lying to me every step of the way, and I had no idea. At first, I didn't know how to react. She eventually came clean. At least, I thought she did. After I confronted her with the things I had started to piece together, she admitted to everything. She confessed to seeing him, to accepting his gifts, and to spending time with him, lying to me all along. She said she had been caught up in the money, in the lifestyle, and she felt guilty about what she had done. I could see the regret in her eyes, and I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't just forget what had happened. The trust had been broken, and I wasn't sure if I could repair it. She begged for my forgiveness, saying she wanted to stop seeing him, that she was done with him, and she wanted to be with me. I wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to just forget everything and move on. I had invested 3 years into this relationship, and I wasn't ready to throw it all away. So we tried to make it work. I convinced myself that we could rebuild what we had, but the truth was that it was already too late. Once trust is broken, it's hard to repair, and despite her words, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being lied to. The relationship became toxic, full of doubt, anger, and hurt. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when deep down, I knew she was still hiding things from me. It felt like I was walking on eggshells all the time, never knowing if she was telling me the truth or not. Eventually, the weight of everything became too much, and I broke up with her. I thought it was the right decision, but she wouldn't leave me alone. She came back to me, told me she had stopped seeing him, and that she loved me. She promised that everything would be different. I was weak, I was young, and I wanted to believe her. The toxic relationship became a cycle: broken trust, promises, and more lies. But I kept going back. I believed her, part of me at least, and so we stayed together for another 6 months. Little did I know, she was still seeing him. And this time, she was even better at hiding it. For the next 6 months, I thought things were going well. In hindsight, I should have known better, but I was young, naive, and emotionally tied to the relationship. The signs were there if I had only paid closer attention. She was still spending money freely, still going on vacations, and still disappearing for hours at a time. But this time, she was better at hiding it. She knew how to deflect my questions, how to make me doubt myself. She had become so skilled at lying that it was almost impressive. How would you feel if your partner hid their affair for months or even years? Write in the comments. But the truth always has a way of finding its way to the surface. I had my suspicions, but I convinced myself that things had changed. She told me that she had cut ties with him, that she was done with everything. I wanted to believe her because I was tired of the constant fighting, the toxic atmosphere that had become our norm. But in the back of my mind, I knew that nothing had truly changed. I tried to ignore my doubts, to convince myself that we could move forward and rebuild, but it was never going to be that simple. Then, everything came crashing down. I discovered that she had been seeing him all along, lying to me every step of the way. I found out in the most shocking way possible, through his surveillance. This man, her sugar daddy, had installed a tracking device on her car. He knew where she was at all times. He wasn't just watching her movements, he was controlling them. He had complete access to her life, and he wasn't letting go of his hold on her. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that he had installed spy cameras in her apartment. Cameras. He had been watching us, watching me, without my knowledge. He had been monitoring every move she made, every time I came over, and every conversation we had. When I showed up at her apartment one day, he saw me through one of the cameras he had installed. And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He texted her. "Why is he at your apartment?" That text message sent a chill down my spine. I was suddenly faced with the reality that this man, this stranger, was in control of our lives, watching us like we were characters in his twisted game. We immediately started searching her apartment, and it didn't take long for us to find the cameras, hidden in plain sight, in the corners of rooms, behind mirrors, inside clocks. It was like something out of a movie, but it was all too real. We had no idea how long they had been there, how many times we had been watched without knowing it. As we searched, it became clear that he wasn't just controlling her. He had multiple women in different parts of the country, all under his control. He was a predator, manipulating young women, using money and power to keep them in line. The worst part was that he wasn't just paying them for sex. He was controlling them, blackmailing them with threats and lies. He would threaten to expose them, ruin their lives, and he used money to keep them compliant. His power over them was suffocating. We knew we had to do something. We couldn't just let him get away with it. So we did what we thought was right. We told his daughters. They needed to know what their father had been doing, and maybe, just maybe, they could help us stop him. They were shocked, terrified, but they eventually told their mother. The truth was starting to come out, and for a brief moment, I thought justice might be served. But we were wrong. The man was too powerful. He controlled everything: his daughter's social media, their communications, everything. He could monitor their messages, spy on their every move, and even manipulate their lives from behind the scenes. He had eyes everywhere, and his reach was vast. It wasn't just about the women he had been seeing. It was about control. Complete and utter control over the people in his life, the people he saw as objects to be used and discarded. And when he found out that I knew everything, he went on the offensive. He threatened me. He threatened to get me kicked out of college, to ruin my life. He filed a protective order against me, accusing me of harassment, even though I had done nothing but try to expose the truth. He knew how to play the system, how to manipulate the law to his advantage. And the worst part? I couldn't afford to fight back. I had no money for legal representation, and the police weren't interested in helping. They didn't care about the situation. They didn't care about the control he had over his daughters, or the manipulation, or the fact that he was terrorizing the women in his life. They saw it as another messy situation that they didn't want to get involved in. I was powerless. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't fight him. I couldn't expose him. And no one would help me. The whole system was rigged against me. I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken relationship, while he continued to live his life, unscathed, untouched by the damage he had caused. As time went on, I found out that, somehow, despite everything that had happened, he was still with his wife and family. He had escaped the consequences of his actions, and no one seemed to care. He had successfully manipulated everyone around him, and I was left in the aftermath of his destruction. He had won. But the worst part of it all was that, despite everything, I couldn't escape the feeling of being trapped in a cycle I couldn't break. I had been lied to, manipulated, and used, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed. I had failed to see the signs, failed to trust my instincts, and failed to protect myself from the toxic hold this man had over my life. And as I looked back, I couldn't help but wonder how many other people he had done this to, how many lives he had ruined without any consequences. As the dust settled and I tried to piece together the aftermath of everything that had happened, I couldn't escape the suffocating weight of it all. The betrayal had shattered me, but what haunted me more than anything was the feeling of helplessness. Here I was, surrounded by the wreckage of a relationship I had invested so much time and energy into, trying to figure out how I had let myself fall so far down the rabbit hole. She had been a manipulator, yes, but so was he. This older man, this so-called sugar daddy, had woven such a complex web of lies, threats, and control that I barely knew who I was anymore. I had been a pawn in his game for too long. What hurt the most was the fact that, despite everything, I couldn't just walk away easily. The toxic pull of the relationship kept reeling me in, even after I knew the truth. It was the emotional manipulation that stuck with me, the lies I had let myself believe, the promises that never came to fruition. She had told me so many times that she had stopped seeing him, that she wanted to rebuild our relationship, that she loved me. She had said all the right things, but none of it had ever been genuine. I realized now that I had been trapped in her web, not just by her, but by the promises I had made to myself to fix things. The whole situation had been built on a foundation of lies, and I was paying the price. It was a few weeks after the cameras were discovered and after I confronted the truth that I started to realize the full extent of his control. He was more than just a sugar daddy to my ex. He was a master manipulator, a puppeteer who had been pulling the strings of not just her life, but of many others. As I dug deeper into the situation, I learned that he had done this with countless women. He had created a network of girls, each one isolated and dependent on him in some way. Some he paid off with gifts and money, others he manipulated with lies and threats. He had a formula that worked, and he wasn't going to stop until he had everything he wanted. I tried to reach out to his daughters again, desperate to make someone see the truth, to stop him from continuing his reign of control. They had been kept in the dark about the extent of his manipulation, just like I had been. His oldest daughter, the one who had eventually told her mother about his behavior, was just as trapped as the others. They all were. His control over them was so subtle, so invasive, that they didn't even realize it. He monitored their social media, their messages, and every conversation they had. His reach extended into every corner of their lives. He had turned their entire world into a surveillance system, and they had no idea how to escape. When I learned that he was still manipulating his daughters, still controlling every aspect of their lives, it made me sick to my stomach. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about the relationship I had lost. It was about the damage he had caused to so many others, his own family included. He was playing a dangerous game, and I had unknowingly been a part of it. I thought that by exposing him, by bringing everything into the light, I could somehow stop him. But the more I pushed, the more I realized that I was powerless. The legal system was no help. The police wouldn't take my accusation seriously. They saw it as a messy domestic situation that didn't warrant their attention. He had enough money and power to protect himself, and I had nothing. I couldn't afford legal help, and I couldn't fight him in the courts. All I had were my words, but they didn't carry weight in a system that was designed to protect people like him. The protective order he filed against me was the final blow. It was his way of keeping me quiet, of making sure I couldn't do anything to disrupt his life. He threatened me, told me he would have me kicked out of college if I didn't back off. It was a tactic to silence me, to push me out of his world. And it worked. The university, despite my protests, took his side. The system had failed me, and there was nothing I could do. I tried to move on, but the scars remained. The trauma of being manipulated, lied to, and watched by both her and him was something that didn't just go away. I was stuck in the aftermath of it all, trying to pick up the pieces of my life. But what haunted me more than anything was the feeling that I hadn't just been deceived by my ex. I had been deceived by a system that allowed people like him to thrive. A system that allowed him to continue to manipulate, control, and hurt people without ever facing any real consequences. Months later, I found out that somehow, despite everything, he was still with his wife and family. He had managed to cover up his tracks, to manipulate everyone around him into believing that everything was fine. It was as though nothing had ever happened, and he was still living his life, untouched by the damage he had caused. It was the ultimate slap in the face. After everything he had done, he was still able to continue his life with no repercussions, still able to control those around him, still able to live in the shadow of his lies. And the worst part? I was left to pick up the pieces. I was left to try to rebuild my life, knowing that I had been part of a story much bigger than I ever imagined. He had controlled me, controlled her, controlled everything. And in the end, I was just another casualty of his twisted game.